Thank y'all. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here for this workshop. If you don't know who I am, I just want to take a moment to properly introduce myself. My name is Terisa Siagatonu. I hail from the Bay Area. I'm right here at my parents' house right now, actually in Hollister, California. But I live in Oakland. I am a Samoan full-time touring poet, speaker, educator, organizer. Um, 14 years ago, I was a first year at UC Santa Cruz, and that was when and where I wrote my first poem. And ever since then, I hadn't stopped. And so much of my journey through becoming a poet started when I was a college student. And so students are such a beacon in my life for many reasons, because college was actually where a lot of myself came into my identity as an artist, as a first generation queer, indigenous, Samoan student of color. I learned a lot about myself and about my people and my history through the privilege and honor of being able to go to college. And so this space is really important to me for many reasons, especially amidst the pandemic that we're all making our way through. And so today's workshop is focused on how do we process this current moment, and more than just process as in how do we get through it, or how do we, experience healing from it. A lot of today is going to focus on the basics around being able to just name the moment for ourselves. As an artist and as a writer, a lot of my job is just languaging things that are maybe hard for us to articulate, but we oftentimes feel. And so, so much of that skill set came from not just me as a poet, but I also graduated from UC Santa Cruz and then continued my education at USC, at the University of Southern California, obtaining my master's in marriage family therapy. I think quickly I realized that poetry is therapeutic, but it is not therapy. Therapy is therapy. And so going to get my master's in mental health and clinical psychology was really important to me, because I had this vision of wanting to be a clinician for my Pacific Islander people, essentially, and come back home into to my community and be able to offer services and have the skill set to be a mental health clinician that dealt with these major mental health issues that oftentimes we don't get to talk about a lot for cultural reasons, or reasons that are impacted by our environments. And so studying mental health in that way was really important to me. And so I was a therapist for a minute. I left the therapy room formally to do healing work on my own terms as a full-time artist. And so that's where I'm currently at right now. So elements of the workshop are going to involve my study as a therapist, as well as my study as an artist. And so, Kathy, thank you so much for helping with my presentation and being the one helping to manage it. I'll just say next when you can click to the next slide. So if you can click to 2 slides. So yes, thank you. So some things that I want you to keep in mind as we're together in this space is, I'm sure folks have been in spaces where you've heard of either ground rules or community agreements and whatnot. These are just a few of mine that I like to keep in mind when I have workshops like this. And so I do encourage you to take notes or take what's helpful from this session together, leave what's not. I know that sometimes I think, okay, I'm gonna remember all that happened in this dynamic time I had with these people, and then I regret that I didn't write certain things down. And so I know personally I'm a note taker, and if you are too, feel free to do that as well. Try it on is just this sentiment around there might be things that we're doing in session today that might be brand new to you, or might feel awkward, or might be something that you're not quite sure what that's going to feel like. I just encourage you to consider trying it on, kind of like when you're shopping at a shopping mall or a department store, and you see something on the hanger that you think maybe will look good on you, but then you try it on, you're like, that didn't look as cute as I thought it was going to look. But you didn't know that until you tried it on, right? And so that's kind of the notion too, is see what this experience is like for you, try on the writing prompts that I give you, and see how it fits. Please at any point ask me any questions you have. I'll leave it to you to manage the mute button in terms of if you have something to say, or please utilize the chat feature as well. I know that's been super helpful during these Zoom sessions. And so if maybe you don't feel as comfortable vocalizing a question you have or a thought or a comment, throw it in the chat, and Kathy and Eileen will help me manage that, okay? And then, yeah, so that just also means talk with me. So it doesn't feel, I'm trying to eliminate the lecture style of the workshop, and it be more of a circle and be more of a cultural gathering of sorts where we're in conversation and in dialogue with one another. And then last but not least, please take care of yourself. Do what you got to do. You got to go to the restroom. You got to call. We are all in a pandemic. We're all doing a writing workshop together right now during a pandemic. And so please do what you got to do to take care of yourself, and let me know, that Eileen and Kathy know what you may need as well. And then the last thing I leave you with to consider is, I can't promise that the space will be the safest space for everyone, because everyone has different unique needs. But I always strive to create a safe enough or brave enough space with the limited time we have. And so 2 questions that helped me to consider that the most are, what will it take for this space to be safe or brave enough for each of us? What is our responsibility to this village we have now become a part of for this moment? And how do we create that in this limited amount of time? But also, how do we create this all the time, even after the workshop, even once I'm gone off this call? How do you walk in the world knowing that it may not be safe for everyone? And how do you how do you make daily choices in your life, add to the community that we're part of, to ensure a safe enough or brave enough space, okay? Cool. Thank you so much. Everyone's still introducing themselves in the chat, so please also check that out too as we're gathering together. Next, please. So we're actually going to start off the workshop with a writing prompt. And so who you see on the screen right now is one of my beacons of light when it comes to poetry, when it comes to radical social justice feminism. Audre Lorde has her work as a poet, as an essayist, as a Black queer scholar, has touched my life and moved me in a way ever since I discovered poetry 14 years ago. And so I'll read this quote, but the quote is what's going to help generate this first free write. But before I read it, I just want to go over the premise of what a free write actually means. And so we're jumping right into it because I know we don't have a lot of time, but also because I know there's a lot that everyone's been holding and carrying with during this time, during this pandemic. And so part of what a free write allows us to do is really silence the editor in our head, do away with the academic expectations that are constantly put on us, that what we're about to create is for a grade, or what we're about to create is for someone else other than myself. That's not what this writing space is for. A free write literally functions in the way that it sounds. It's a space where you're given permission to freely write exactly how it sounds, how what you want to say sounds in your head, on your heart, especially in this moment. We oftentimes disregard the first utterance or first sound we make of the first thought we have, because we're so used to self-censorship, or because we move in a world where the powers that be benefit from us being silent. And we come from communities that have been so marginalized for so long that we've been so accustomed to silence that it's been part of our identity. And so we reject that notion in this moment, and in the free writes I'm offering today, as to say you actually have full permission to say exactly what it is you want to say, and how you want to say it, in the language you want to say it. And so with that said, I'm going to read this Audre Lorde quote, and then read the prompt, and then I'm going to designate a certain amount of time for us to do a little free writing together, okay? So Audre Lorde says, or she asks us a few poignant questions. She asks, what are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own, until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence? Audre has also said this notion around, like, our silence actually will not protect us. So sometimes we stay silent out of fear of being misunderstood, or fear that our silence will actually protect us from that which we are threatened by, but it actually doesn't. And so the free write question is to actually answer the questions for yourself that Audrey's asking, especially the one where she says, what is it that you need to say? And to also keep in mind that her questions aren't asking you to write about just anything. She's asking you to be specific. And I want you to be able to answer for yourself, what is the difference between writing about what you want to say and writing about what you need to say? What is urgent in this moment for you to language and pen right now? This free write is not one where you're expected to share after you write it. So if that helps alleviate any pressure off of how you will write this, then just know that this is for you, okay? I'm gonna check if you have any questions about that, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, if it's clear to you what the writing prompt is asking, I'm gonna set a timer and we're gonna just free write for a minute right now, okay? So I'm gonna set a timer for just 3 minutes, and then I'll give you timestamps of when we're getting close to the end of time, okay? The other thing that I meant to mention is with the free write also is the goal is to also to keep your pen moving, or keep your thoughts moving, keep your fingers typing, and not stop. Try really hard, at least, not to stop. And try really hard to not overthink it. And so first utterance, first sound that comes to mind, and try to write for the full 3 minutes, okay? And if you have any questions, throw it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm gonna start the timer now. Thanks, y'all. You have about 2 more minutes. You have about 30 more seconds. Think about how you're gonna wrap up your free write. How are you gonna wrap it up in the end? All right. Right. I know that probably felt really fast. Sometimes 3 minutes feels daunting. Sometimes it goes by really quickly when we're really in a zone. Thank y'all so much for trying that on and for taking on the task of answering the free write prompt. Um, I want you to hold it with you with no pressure to share, but I do want to hear either out loud, you can unmute yourself, or maybe throw it up in the chat box, how that was for folks, how the process of hearing the directions and given the time to actually just write for yourself felt, and how it was, what came up for y'all. Kukui says, that made me feel better. Mm. Someone said, I never knew I quote unquote needed to write. Snaps to that. um, yeah, other folks, any other impressions folks had about the free write?
I didn't know that I can stay focused even under pressure myself. Before, when I didn't have um, the skills to do it, I was just have to sit in front of the laptop and try to think and think and think without anything coming to mind. But with the exercise, it's just like it's automatic. It's almost an automatic.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Peter. And I think folks are saying are sharing certain similar sentiments in the chat. I see folks saying it was motivating. It felt really hard at first, but it felt like pent up energy in my body. I definitely feel that a lot. It was liberating. I didn't know I could write my feelings or truth like that. This was an intentional way to be present, to breathe, to let go. Um, Jalissa said, I loved it a lot. It felt like how we vocalize our concerns and thoughts, but I was able to fully connect with my mind voice, if that makes sense. It does make sense. Um, Something that I've noticed out of leading writing workshops for 14 years, for most half my life, is that there's something about the permission when given that allows for us to access a part of our psyche, of our heart, of our emotions, that allows us to flood with truth and like spill that which maybe is typically hard to do if not given that permission, or when we're constantly in spaces that aren't built with sending us the message that our voice matters, or what we say and feel makes a difference or is important enough for people to listen to. And it is quite the breakthrough moment to see folks grapple with that in real time, of like, I never knew I needed that. I never knew it could feel so liberating. I didn't know I could go there with my story. And the power is both in realizing that for yourself, and then being able to say that when you realize that you're also in a room with people who feel very, very similar to you. And so thank you so much, everyone, for sharing that. We're going to have 2 more writing prompts later, brief writing prompts as well later, and then also have opportunity, if folks want to share what they wrote later, okay? Before going on to the next slide, I just wanted to also share, because even though I didn't take on writing with you in this moment, I know for me, COVID-19 has really illuminated and unsurfaced a lot that maybe I've been holding personally, but have been unable to focus on or pay attention to because of the busyness of life and what life has been asking of me. And so I know I'm no exception to all the ways COVID-19 has changed things for me and my family, has made certain things more stressful, has made certain things more clear. And so I know I'm sitting here on the birthday of Malcolm X, on the birthday of Yuri Kochiyama today, on the birthday of what would have been my grandpa's 88th birthday yesterday before he passed in 2018, and holding a lot of loss of important leaders in our communities, um, as as both a point of sadness, but also trying to manage it as a point of hope too. That this moment is so uncertain on so many levels. Um, that the constant thing that keeps me going is turning to our elders and turning to our ancestors and turning to what history has taught us about moments of stress like this. And so I just wanted to name that and share that as to say that I'm right here with y'all trying to manage it all. But I know that the best ways in which I've been able to get through COVID-19 and this pandemic is in community, is with y'all and with other parts of our community as well. And so with that said, Kathy, if you could go to the next slide. That was just a little bit about how COVID-19 has been impacting me. But I want to open it up to the group right now to just begin a dialogue around exactly where folks are at for themselves. What has personally changed for you the most during this time of COVID-19? Maybe what's been the most stressful part about it? What's the impact? What impact has COVID-19 had in your life? And so I'm going to open it up for folks to share both in the chat, but also unmute yourself as well. Also, just a note on sharing. I know it's awkward because we're not it's virtual and we're not like in person, being able to feel each other's energy as well as we could if we were face to face. But just also manage, if you're someone who maybe doesn't speak up a lot, maybe these moments of prompted questions that I'll continue on with throughout our session is ones that you might want to take a chance and go out on a ledge and share how you're feeling. I can almost guarantee that you're probably not the only one that's feeling what you're feeling in your own way, in their own way. Yeah, and so really just sitting for yourself with how have you been? But what impact has COVID-19 had? What has been the impact that COVID-19 has had on you or your family or your community? What has changed for you? I'll let folks ruminate on that and think through that for a minute. So in case you just joined us, we're at the point in the workshop where we're just sitting with and attempting to name the impact COVID-19 has had on us personally. What has changed the most for us due to COVID-19? What's been a stressful point about it? And what's the impact been like?
Hey, sis Teresa and community. Sorry for joining the party late. But thank you for the question. I feel like reflecting on how COVID-19 has impacted me personally. Ever since the beginning, I feel like it's put our global community at like a pause to really just stop and reflect. At the same time, I feel like with work and trying to disconnect from like that sense of normalcy has put us into thinking that, oh, we need to be more productive and being from home. But I feel like that has also been like, no, actually, you should just pause and just really check in with yourself and prioritize, what are the things that you've been putting like on the back burner that, you can pick up on now. So for me, I feel like it's just been a time of reflection and being okay with how things are right now and not having to feel like I have to accomplish this task list or these things to do. What has also been really healing for me is all of the PI heritage mental workshops that a few folks that are in this room have been a part of. So I feel like being in those spaces and trying to find that sense of community that's still there has been helpful as far as like processing through this time. So that's how I feel where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Edwina. You're bringing up some great points around our considerations of what is being asked of us by our occupation, by work, whether you're a student working or you're, work in an office or work on the front lines. It is almost unreasonable to say that you can deliver in the same exact way as you could have before the pandemic began. But what I also hear you saying is that this moment is also giving you time to rethink productivity, rethink that demand on our bodies and on our minds of like what labor looks like, and how fair it may or may not be to our health. So thank you for bringing that up. I see things in the chat around lots of realizations and conflicts within family. I don't know if anyone else feels that, but something's being magnified in this moment with the close quarters you share with your loved ones, for sure. You're not alone in that. Definitely not. And also, yeah, the time you get to spend with your family is also real too. Like you get time back. I know that's something I'm experiencing too with my parents, because I'm usually on the road most of the school year. But with my tour being canceled and everything being online, I came to shelter with my parents. And this is probably the most time I've spent with them since they have moved here, and since this, period of time has given me, like, from when I used to live in LA and whatnot. And so very thankful for that. There's also, I see loss in the chat too. Been dealing with the loss of my father about a month ago. The fact that I couldn't go to Samoa for his funeral, it's been weighing heavily on me personally. There's some real yeah. And especially from many of us come from communities in which the way we grieve death is a whole process, is a whole honoring that we are not allowed to do because of COVID-19. We're not even allowed to leave, or we're not even allowed to gather. We're not even allowed to gather in the ways that we would usually do, which brings on a whole different level of pain and loss as well. I see that COVID-19 has been a roller coaster, good days, bad days, productive days, days where you want to rest. I'm being kind to myself and burning through journal pages and writing. As a Samoan, it has challenged my ideas about fellowship within the church, since many churches aren't meeting during COVID-19. That's so real. Finding balance within the isolation itself is so real too. Thank y'all so much. You're bringing up a lot of what this workshop is centered on, where to a large degree, and Kathy, you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. To a large degree, what many of us are making our way through amidst COVID-19 is actually grief. I have been on many calls and gatherings online in which the grief looks all kinds of ways, y'all. It's the spectrum between grieving the death of a loved one, all the way to grieving the loss of your graduation ceremony, grieving the loss of not being able to complete your championship game for the sport you played, being able to grieve a baby shower that you missed, grieving all kinds of monumental moments in our life, grieving the birth of children in your life that you had planned to be there for, grieving a dinner date maybe with a loved one or with your partner, or everything, right? And I've been in moments in which folks have shrunken the importance or significance of certain things, of like, oh, people, like I have student mentees who will say, it's just graduation. I know, like, there's more serious things happening in the world. But also hold on, because like, no matter what it is that you're feeling loss around, loss is still loss. It's still grief, and it still deserves to be honored, right? And so we assign certain sizes to it in comparison to the world around us, but it's also valid to say, I'm sad that that my family didn't get to see me walk across the stage. Even right now in this moment, if I'm being honest, I feel a lot of emotions when I think of graduation season, because I come from a community in which we do graduation season so big for our communities. And I feel a lot of grief and loss around, it doesn't even take for me to have experience of losing the graduation myself to know that my grief is tied to that of everyone in our community that I care about, right? And so this is all just illuminating the fact that grief is not just about feeling sadness or being sad about something you lost. Grief is deeper than that. If you really take the word bereavement, or if you ever heard bereavement or bereave, the etymology of the word comes from the notion of to rob or to take away or to rob something of from someone, where you actually, something was actually taken from you, right? You can go to the next slide, Kathy. Thank you. And so David Kessler is someone who is named the foremost expert on grief. So if you Google him, he runs grief.com. So there's a lot of resources on that website if you're interested in that. But I was in a session with him and some other community members a few weeks ago on grief and COVID-19. And he had said a lot of profound things, one of them being that grief at its core is a change. It's a change we didn't want. And so in some ways, when we say grief is about something that you were robbed of, it's something that was taken away from you, that you didn't want to be taken away from you, right? And so you can go to the next slide, Kathy, thank you. So I ask you, community, everyone on this call, in your experience amidst COVID-19, I want you to be able to reflect on what has been taken away from you in this moment. What have you been essentially robbed of? And we'll get into the importance of why naming this is important later. But I want to open it up, if you want to do it in the chat, or again, if you want to unmute yourself, to just share for you yourself how you would answer these two questions. And then you don't have to answer both of them directly, or you can answer either or maybe a different question just popped up in your head that you would rather answer around this topic. But please feel free to use the chat feature or unmute yourself and share with us, yeah, what has been taken from you? What have you been robbed of in this moment? I see, and I'm looking at the chat. Thank you so much, y'all. Yeah, someone missed their brother's first baby being born. Definitely learning along with my students that it's okay to be grieving a loss of missing out on an experience. Oh yeah. You could have been looking forward to what maybe feels mundane to you, but it is important. Maybe you wanted to go shopping with friends and it was set for the date right after the shelter in place was put in order. That's okay. That's real grief. That's real loss. That was taken from you. Kukui said, it's hard for me to share the things I lost to others because I try to always be grateful and thankful and keep that perspective, but I do grieve inside silently. How many folks, maybe by show of hands if you want, feel that way too, where like you want to share it with others that you've been feeling this grief, but you don't want to come off as ungrateful, or maybe you've shrunken the size of your grief as being not as important as what the current moment's about. I know I have. I can see, yeah, quite a few folks. Yep, everyone's going off on the chat. Yep. It's like we pardon our feelings. It's like, no, how I'm feeling about this moment isn't as important as X, Y, and Z, whatever it be, right? But then there's something about what happens when you repress those feelings, right? And we'll talk about that in a moment too. But thank y'all for continuing to share, yeah, what's been taken from you, what's been robbed from you. We're about to get into the second free write. And so you can do it on the same paper or same document that you had. Kathy, you can go to the next slide, please. And so Valerie Kaur is not only a good friend of mine, but she is also an activist, a scholar, a lawyer, an organizer. She is best known for her TED Talk that she that's available on YouTube that she gave around this idea of revolutionary love. As she talks about revolutionary love, she brings up this point about grief, and she says grief is actually the price of love. She first had mentioned love is fierce labor, that what makes love revolutionary is that it's not just a feeling, it's the work, it's the process, it's the labor we put into that which we care about, whatever it is we care about. but with the price of love, or with the cost of loving something so much, comes grief at some point. And so when she says grief is the price of love, because that's the price we pay for loving something so deeply, so profoundly, right? In this next writing prompt, family, I'm going to set a timer again, but I want you to, in response to this notion of grief being the price of love, I want you to write about the price you had to pay when you lost what you're currently grieving. And maybe you lost it in this moment to COVID-19, or maybe something else came up for you. Maybe there's a grief that you're holding about something that has nothing to do with with COVID-19, but maybe you've been harboring it for a while and you'd rather write or speak to that instead. And what did it cost you? So when we talk about the price of something, imagine like a price tag. What did losing that thing that you loved cost you? If you need help with this writing prompt, I'm going to offer you something that is called a ghost line. It's a line that you could start your writing prompt with, and you can fill it in however you want and go in whatever direction you want to with it, if you want to. You don't have to use this ghost line, but it's an offering. The ghost line being, when blank was taken from me, and you fill in that blank, I paid for it, ... And you fill that in however way you want, okay? All right, family, unless you have any questions, feel free to throw it up in the chat, but that's the writing prompt for this next 3 minutes, okay? Again, remember how it felt to give yourself permission to write to the first prompt. Give yourself that exact permission in this moment too, okay? You're thinking about grief being the price of love. What did it cost you? Okay, 3 minutes starting now. You have about 2 more minutes. Have your last 60 seconds, y'all. So start thinking about how you're going to bring it all together in about a minute. All right, family. go ahead and wrap up your last thought or your last word. So same with the first prompt. I want to check in with folks about how that felt. And then we're going to ease our way into actually opening up for folks who may want to share. Before I open it up fully, just some notes around sharing. This part is much like every component of this workshop being sacred to both me and what we create together. The sharing part is extra sacred, in my opinion, because it takes a lot of vulnerability. It takes a lot of courage for folks to openly share something that they created or something that they've been thinking about with a room essentially full of maybe strangers or people that to varying degrees like don't know very well. And so we're building trust very rapidly for the sake of being able to be the community that we deserve to be for one another by assessing what it'll take to be an active listener, what it'll take to not be working on what I'm writing while someone else is speaking, what it'll take to open your heart fully to maybe opinions or thoughts that are different from your own. There's so much value in the sharing portion of workshops like this because it teaches us skills that I think we could do better at having as a global society that a lot of our world leaders and a lot of leaders in our communities could also benefit from being better at as well. And so we practice that in community now so that we can model it in the world after this workshop, right? And so all that to say, I'm seeing some folks share about what that process was like for them. Leo said this was even deeper than the first. I feel like I just had a therapy session. Yay, free therapy. Edwina said definitely liberating. Haven't written anything in a while. Woo. Yeah. And so I'm going to fold into now this time to also offer it up to folks who maybe want to share exactly what they wrote on their page. Something to also consider about the sharing portion is you don't have to share every single thing you wrote. Maybe you want to share a line, or you want to share a stanza, or you want to share a thought. That's okay too. But if you want to share everything you wrote, that's fine too. But I just wanted to give options to folks who maybe feel like pressured that they have to share everything. You don't. I see folks saying that it felt like breaking free, feeling unashamed. It felt healing. I feel like I've just told my deepest secrets out loud on paper. LOL. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would like to share.
Yeah, please do. Take it away.
Yeah, I think what I wrote, I didn't realize I'd go so deep. Was that, it cost me my generosity. I feel like what this pandemic has done to me, because now I'm like very insecure about my health, that I'm more concerned about my own health than, the health of other people. Like even when I meet with close friends or families, I'm like more concerned about my own health versus their thing. So I think that's something that I was very, that I felt that this has robbed me from, because, I try to be a very generous person or a caring person, but with this whole pandemic and seeing everyone reacting all crazy, I feel like that's something that kind of rubbed off on me. And it's like something that to constantly remind myself that, to be careful of, to make sure that it doesn't rob the good things from me. And so I think that's what I somehow just ended up writing. So yeah.
People are snapping for you in the chats too, Nestor. Thank you so much. That's a word. Because oftentimes we associate generosity with being something we strive to have and we strive to be about, where it's a positive attribute, and that's something that you are struggling to keep hold of in this moment, or that COVID-19 is taking away from you. It's so real, and you're obviously not the only one who feels that way. So thank you so much for sharing it. I see Rachel saying, I was on a route to getting a hold of something and then it got interrupted by COVID. And then now that I'm thinking about it, my emotions lately have been stemming from all that I lack. Thank you for helping to break us open. Yeah, I got chicken skin. I got goosebumps reading that. So there's so much to be said about what we were all in our own journeys, what was making a way in our life before all this hit. And all of a sudden is this major roadblock. All of a sudden is this major stoppage. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Kathy. for sharing that. My energy and my capacity for others was what it cost me. It's already so much just to be mindful and present in our own feelings, emotions, and needs. Whew, yeah. I think every day, in some ways, I've had to tell myself, you're in a pandemic, you're in a pandemic. That email will be sent, they'll understand. Your response time is perfectly normal because you're in a pandemic, Teresa. And so I'm right there with you, Kathy. Thank you. Edwina wanted to share one line that she wrote, "My kindness is actually killing me." Whew. Reflecting on not knowing how to say no and stacking a lot on our plates. Yes. I took a deep breath with you there, sis, because similar to Nestor's generosity and with your kindness, with our care, our giving, our ability to give, is being stretched thin. It's being tested in a lot of ways by this current moment, by the inequalities of this current moment, for sure. So thank you. Leo, thank you for bringing up this moment around physical health and the toll it's been taking on your physical health. Paid for it by berating myself, feeling like I don't deserve health. Yeah, there's something, yeah. This moment has been enormous on, there's a lot to be said about the impact on our mental health, but our physical health is connected to our mental health, y'all. Surprise, surprise, right? Like, it's all connected. Our emotional health, our spiritual health, every part of it, right? The environment the ecosystem that we exist in is all impacting everything. And what we know, or if you don't know, so much of my work when I was a therapist was on trauma-informed care, trauma-informed best practices. So much about trauma teaches us that trauma is remembered by our body first and foremost, and then our mind, and then our neurological systems. But our body remembers everything that happens to it, and our bodies are forever changed after traumatic events and things like that. And so when we say take care of our body, when we say self-care and all those notions around it, we literally mean that. We literally mean tending to what it'll take to sustain yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically. A lot of kudos to Edwina's line I see in the chat. Abby says, facing toxicity behind the walls of my own home. COVID-19 has given me no choice but to face the very things I often easily avoided. So this notion of the dynamics in your own household, it's on 100 for a lot of us, because a lot of us are spending a lot of time here at home. Things that maybe were easy to sweep under the rug when you're a busy student and not in the thick of the chaos at home may now be resurfacing because of this moment. And how do we manage that? How do we hold that, right? Thank y'all so much. I'm gonna see, but yeah, keep feel free to keep sharing if you like, but we'll continue to move through this next note on suffering. Oh, go ahead, Kathy. Thank you. To couple with this notion of what we pay, what the price has been for our grief, we're gonna slowly fold in these other considerations of what this moment is asking for us. So much of what grief feels like is this big, enormous thing that wants to envelope our energy and tell us that we have to stay in the pain of it, and that's all we're going to be about. And we have to stay in the stress of it, and that's all we're going to be about. Something that I learned that felt new to me, even as I've been studying mental health and psychology, it felt new when I was in the session with David Kessler, when he had mentioned, he was actually talking us through having experienced the tragic loss of his son. His son had died in a tragic car accident. And, he was trying to move through the stages of grief that felt very linear for him in the beginning, but realized like that's not how life isn't linear. So he's not experiencing grief linear either. And he mentioned that it wasn't enough for him to accept his son's death. He had to make meaning of it. He had to figure out what it meant to him. And he said, this quote that you see up here around, we have this urge to want to make our grief smaller so that we can get past it, so that we can move on, so that it doesn't take over us. But the reality is that we actually have to get bigger. We actually have to contemplate what it means to walk in the world after a moment of grief, after a traumatic event that brings on grief. What it means to actually get bigger enough to handle and manage that which tried to break us or that which tried to affect us. Okay. You can go to the next slide, Kathy. Thank you. So when I say, when he was sharing, like, it wasn't enough for him to just accept that loss, he had to make meaning of it. That is actually a big component, and probably one of the most powerful components of what it feels like for me as an artist and as a poet. So much of my task is languaging that which is maybe hard to articulate outside of art and outside of what art can do. It was actually Angela Davis, if folks are familiar with the great Angela Davis, who once said that artists are the beacons of light in our communities. Artists are the ones who articulate and say things for the rest of us in ways that maybe we didn't know how to do before. And so when I say the meaning we make, what I mean is, so much of why our suffering is unbearable at times, or why it's hard for us to heal, is partly due to the event that caused that suffering, or that caused that grief, that caused that pain. The other part of the equation of why we suffer and why it's hard for us to heal is three main things. One of them being our response to that event, our response to that painful act, or our response to that loss is part of it. The other part is how equipped or not equipped we were before the event. What was in place in our life, or what was our capacity before we were impacted by COVID-19, or before we were impacted by that painful event. And then the last one being our coping skills towards recovering from the event. Do we have any coping skills? Are we living a life in which we have healthy coping skills? There's a lot of coping skills out there that we enact in all the time. Doesn't always mean that it's the best for us. Doesn't always mean that it makes us feel the best after we do them. And so that's the other part of the equation that the workshop is now turning its direction into, mostly around our response and how we can take control of that response so that we can make the meaning that we want to make out of it, so that the act or that painful thing that happened to us doesn't make the meaning out of us. We make a meaning out of it. Okay. So next, please. So part of how we do that is we have to name it. We have to at least start by naming the event, naming the thing, naming the pain, naming the loss. So many folks in this space have said, I want to share what I'm going through with others, but I don't want to come off as ungrateful, or people are just going through way more than I am, and so I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm saying right here in this moment, we got to break out of that cycle of believing that our silence is going to protect us, y'all. We got to break out of that cycle and really contemplate what our silence is costing us. That's another way of saying it. I spent so much of my life growing up in a very traditional, beautiful, but traditional Samoan household. Samoa is all that I am in terms of my culture. I grew up in a church. My dad's a kiakongo, or a deacon, like all of it, right? And I also grew up with this notion that, for better or worse in our culture, it's not always highly encouraged for young people to speak up or speak their mind. And so I wrote in my journals all throughout my life and just suppressed them and wrote quietly to myself until I got to college, until I wrote my first poem, until I performed for the first time at an open mic on campus, where people were like, I want to hear what you have to say, or I want you to be able to perform and be yourself. And it took a long time to break through those cycles and break through those walls of believing that I was supposed to stay silent and not actually speak my truth. And so when I say name it, oftentimes we're not even allowing ourselves to just name the pain, name the trauma, name who hurt us, name the grief, name the assault, name anything that it brings up. like the thing is happening to us, but for some reason we're not languaging it, or we're not allowed to, or there's barriers in our way that keep us from doing it. So it's either that, or we're doing one of a few things. Maybe we're misnaming it sometimes. We're not being accurate with what it is we're experiencing, or maybe we're avoiding the truth. Sometimes we're protecting others for the sake of their protection at the expense of us. So sometimes that misnaming is real. Sometimes we're not naming it because it's too painful. It is too painful for us to bring ourselves to that point, and that's okay. That's actually completely normal and reasonable. Because why would you want to name it if it hurts that bad, right? And the other thing is possibly that we're not used to the permission of naming it. Maybe due to the cultural reasons of why you're not allowed to. Maybe it's intergenerational trauma. Maybe you've been taught that it's not okay to speak or name that. Maybe it was your upbringing, maybe it was your childhood. I'm going to look in the chat. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this, Maya Angelou quote. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Whew. Yep. Yeah, sometimes I feel, Shane says, sometimes I feel like I'd be a burden to the person when I share my thoughts or feelings towards something. Man, if you feel that way, y'all, go ahead and snap it up for that sentiment, because that's oftentimes what I hear too. And it's usually tied to culture around burdensome, of like, it's more burdensome for us to share our thoughts and feelings than to just keep it to ourselves. But again, as we're talking about the cost of things, there's a cost to silence too. There was a moment in which I had to decide that the cost of my silence as a first-gen queer woman of color student on a predominantly white campus was not one that I wanted to pay for anymore. So I stopped paying for it because it was too high of a cost. I didn't even have, there's no currency in the world that existed for me to ever pay that anymore. And so that's what turned me to poetry, and that's what turned me to trying to practice what I preach in terms of living a life in which I can't afford to be silent. I come from ancestors that would not allow that. And so many of us do. Is something I'll leave you with. And so so that's one part of it, right? Is being able to just name it, right? The next part, Kathy, if you could go to the next slide, is also reframing the way we think about these impactful events in our life. So when I say reframing, what I mean is not only is it important to name these moments, it's also important to take control of the meaning we make of these moments. So much of the meaning that we assign comes from the power of how we think about them, about so I say cognitive because that's what I mean by thinking of them, right? Is there's a lot of power in our thoughts that we don't always realize is happening to us or in us. Anyone ever heard of cognitive behavioral therapy? I'm about to give you a brief 101 on it. There may be aspects in your life in which you have experienced CBT. It's also better known as CBT. I see some folks saying, yeah. You have probably experienced activities or exercises that fall in line with what CBT models as a therapeutic orientation. But I'm gonna give you just a quick brief 101 throughout this part of my workshop for anyone who wants to take note of it. But just remember that oftentimes how we think about something is what determines how we feel about it. And then it actually determines how we behave. Okay. So when you remember CBT, remember those three components: think, feel, behave, or think, feel, act. Oftentimes how we think about something, just the mere thought of a thought, directly affects and determines how we're going to feel about it and how we end up acting based on it. To the point of, this notion of like, because I think it, it must be true. Or I think it, therefore I must do something about it. Whereas sometimes if you think it, you just think it. Sometimes you think it and it's actually a lie and you don't actually have to follow through with doing anything about it. But that's the power of our thoughts. That like, oh, I think someone came at me sideways, so I have to go sock them in the face. I don't know. But it's like, no, brain, don't do that. That's just a negative thought you had, right? That was a bad example. But, or like someone takes your parking spot, like I have to go bad on them. You don't. But that's like really easy to say because sometimes I'm like, I do got to do something. It's justice. But all that to say, just keep that in mind, right? And so, Kathy, if you go on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about what, just breaking down the power of our thoughts, right? So this is just a literal animation of what I'm walking y'all through, that, you know, all of a sudden something happens. It could be anything. Bam, COVID-19 happens. Whoa, right? And then all of a sudden you have thoughts about what just happened. So I'm sure all of us are in our thoughts 24/7 during this time. Many things keep coming up in our thought bubbles during this time. But then what that also does, it dictates how we experience what we feel based on our thoughts, okay? So remember that that's a direct correlation of like how we think about COVID-19 is impacting how we feel, okay? That then, last but not least, impacts how we respond, how we act, what motivates us, where, like, what gives us energy to do something about it, okay? That's like the literal power of our thoughts. It's like, damn, that was just a seed in my mind. And all of a sudden it turned into me sleeping in throughout the whole day because we wanted to avoid this really painful experience, which is fine. But just remembering that it came from thoughts that keep ruminating in our bodies and our hearts, right? Next slide, please. So when I talk about reframing, reframing isn't going to be the end all to our healing, but it's a stepping stone towards it. Because a lot of times we run with the negative thoughts, we run with what they call the automatic thoughts, and that's just the truth to us. Like, because we thought it, that's the truth, that's how it's going to be, that's how this all ends. I'm saying there's got to be another way. CBT says there's power in reframing and reshifting and creating an alternative route in our mind that can actually lead to healing. To the point that if you change the way you think and behave, you can actually have power in changing the way you feel. And so this is just a handy diagram of 3 C's of cognitive therapy. Catch, check, change. So catch meaning being able to catch the thought that you have quickly before it turns into an emotion that you act on. And then check and reflect on how accurate and useful that thought is. And maybe the check is a literal check. You got to actually ask yourself, like, Teresa, is that really how you see it? Or is that a trigger that brings up something in the past? Or is that not worth your energy? Or maybe they also had a bad day and you don't know about it. So all kinds of things, right? So you really check in with yourself and then change. The opportunity to change the thought to a more accurate or helpful one as needed. Because what this also is a practice of is when we're able to control that part of the neurological part of our bodies, it also calms our heart rate. It lowers our cortisol levels, which is tied to our stress levels. And it actually makes us healthier when we're able to remember that as powerful as our thoughts are, we also have power over them, okay? So that's just a tidbit to keep in mind. Next, Kathy, please. Also something I wanna leave you with to consider is when we gain control of our thoughts, we then have control of how we behave and ultimately how we feel. Our mood improves when our emotions are more positive. Obviously, we all know that. And then we struggle less. We're more optimistic, we're more hopeful. And my favorite part is that we're also more able to show up in our lives and in our relationships for our communities and especially for ourselves when we're able to even just do that mental work of tending to our thoughts and taking care of watering the parts of us that we want to grow and then changing and reframing the parts of us that aren't true. Because what we know and what has been studied upon and documented in terms of mental health, next please, is this notion that Bessel van der Kolk talks about in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's one of the most powerful books I've read around trauma. But he says that being able to feel safe with the other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. There's a lot that can be said about what goes into what can help a person feel better mentally, but just the mere notion of being in community or connected with someone who makes you feel safe enough to be vulnerable with, feel safe enough to listen to you, feel safe enough to express yourself freely to, feel safe enough. That right there is probably the most important aspect of mental health. Yes, therapy is important. I will always be team therapy for everybody. Yes, medication even is important. I'm someone who I've used antidepressants, I've used anti-anxiety medications at times in which I really needed them. And yet all that still boiled down to was that if I could at least be in community with people who made me feel safe enough, it greatly improved the possibility of me being mentally good and being mentally well enough to show up in my life and show up in my community and whatnot. I've seen that time and time again also as an artist. That's also part of what is contributing to why you all are expressing the power you're feeling and being able to share your story and your free rides right now. It's because we are rapidly building trust and vulnerability and the possibility of vulnerability and feeling safe enough in a way that's improving and speaking to wanting to better our mental health. And I knew that both as a practitioner of mental health, but also as an artist, because again, you do this for so long. I've been doing this for 14 years and I have never seen a more transformative healing experience as I have in a writing workshop. So of the many things I've ever done with poetry, whether it be writing, touring, competing, teaching, it's teaching that is the component that I love the most. And it's this that I love the most because I see the breakthroughs and I see the moments in which folks are stepping into realizations that they've never had outside of spaces like this, because this is at times sometimes the safest they've felt or the most vulnerable they felt, right? And so I don't take this moment for granted, and I'm glad that no one else is either. Oh, next, please, Kathy. When I, and so in my personal life, when I think about the reframing work I do around like things that have caused me pain or things that come up for me, something has come up even just recently when I think about reframing my healing. The recent thing is the image you see, which I'll read in a second, but something that I am constantly carrying with me in my career as an artist and as a mental health practitioner is two things that I call it my thesis statement, where I'm like, this is what I think is the key to justice and liberation in our world, is that our health actually gets better when we're able to express ourselves and tell our stories. And that not only that, our health improves when we have agency over our voice and control of our narratives. There's nothing I have seen to have a greater impact on a community, on a people, on a person, than the moment I've seen them being able to get permission to tell their story. And the power of storytelling being so healing and so beneficial to our health that I can see why it's not one that we prioritize a lot in our communities. Oftentimes you'll see that art departments, art funding is oftentimes on the chopping block across our schools, across our communities. It's the least funded part of our sector in our communities over technology and science and all these other important parts of us, but it's usually the humanities, it's usually art, it's usually self-expression that don't get a lot of attention or are not encouraged as being things that people should invest in. You can see it in the way that artists are oftentimes censored or threatened by people who abuse power, or those in power shut down the opportunity for people to speak up, tell their truth. You see it in corners of the world. It doesn't happen just here in the US, but you see political artists are imprisoned. Sometimes they're put to death for just speaking up. And so what does that tell me? That tells me, oh, there's some kind of power in storytelling that those who abuse power are scared of. I oftentimes think, I'm like, this administration's scared of us. They're scared of artists. They're scared of people wanting to tell the truth and speak the truth. That's why they don't give us the mic. And that's oftentimes why we have to take it back, right? And so what that also brought up for me is something I wrote in my journal, as you see in this image, around my reframe on healing. I too used to be very much about like self-care. You can't heal others if you can't heal yourself. Then I remembered I come from a community that actually taught me that collective care is more so what I'm rooted in, even beyond self-care, because collective care has been what has taught me who I am as self, that there is no self-care if I didn't know who the village was that took care of me first. And so what it helped me to language and what I had to name for myself just a few weeks ago, I wrote this a few weeks ago, was that it's not that I deserve to and need to heal because of what it will bring me. I know that my healing will flow back to my ancestors. That is the reason for my healing, because my ancestors are the reason for me. And so much of what I think about when I think about healing from this grief and loss of COVID-19 is that it energizes me to want to heal because my ancestors are so deserving of it, because they are the reason I'm alive. They're the reason I'm a writer, that they're the reasons why I have poems, because I know I don't write my poems myself, my ancestors do. They lived and combated and died of colonization, of imperialism in ways where how could I ever dare to be too nervous to say a poem when they have lived and survived so much on my behalf that it excites me to do all that I can in this precious time I have on this earth to heal as best as I can, do my best as I can, do it in community, heal, like help heal my people with me, so that we can be at our best capacities to show up for ourselves and the rest of our people who are also hurting, who also don't deserve to be hurting, but are. Okay. I'm gonna take a breath. I know I said a lot there. Thank y'all for the love. I see y'all. We are inching to the last free write, the last writing prompt. Kathy, you can go to the next slide, please. All right, family. Whew, I'm gonna take a breath. So this is the last writing prompt that we'll do today. That'll also be accompanied with a moment to share. Okay. The writing prompt is inspired by, again, another David Kessler passage that he had shared on the call that I was in community with him on, where he said, you know, all trauma has grief, yes, but all grief does not have trauma. I would also accompany that with all grief doesn't have to have trauma. That even in the grief that you're holding, even in the loss that you're holding, it does not have to actually turn into the direction of chronic misery or chronic pain. If we could take hold of it, if we can name it, reframe it, if we can not do it in isolation either, right? If we could do it together. That all trauma has grief, yes, but all grief does not have trauma. That there is a life beyond just post-traumatic stress. There's also something to be said about post-traumatic growth, post-traumatic healing, post-traumatic possibility. I don't know, I'm making some things up, but there has to be a world in which that's possible. Otherwise, what are we here for, family? Because I know we have to be more than our trauma. And maybe we can't all be more than it immediately. If the pain is too much to even be there, you can be like, Teresa, I'm not even there. And that's real. And I want to honor that. But when I think of it in the bigger picture of things, I'm always energized by, like, this is not how we go out. There's got to be more than this moment for us. That COVID-19 does not get to take our people's lives, does not get to take our ability to grieve them for much longer. That's not okay, and that's not fair, right? Okay. So with that said, this is our final writing prompt. I want you to consider what we've been talking about around the power of our thoughts and how automatically they go into like being really intrusive to really negative, sometimes damaging places. And I want us to try on the ability to choose just one of those intrusive thoughts that you experience. Maybe one that's caused you pain during COVID-19, one that has caused you grief. And in this writing prompt, at least, we're going to attempt to think about it in a new way and think about an alternative ending to that thought that's new and different from what you have automatically been, the direction you've automatically been going into with that thought, okay? So you're choosing just one of the thoughts, one of the experiences you've been having, one of the events, and we're gonna remix and we're gonna reframe it and turn it into a different direction. We're gonna reframe it and write in response to that new thought. To help you, if you need a ghost line, I offer two of them. You can use both of them, you can use one of them, or you don't have to use either of them. But the first one being, I changed my mind, ... And then you speak to what you changed your mind about. Or the ghost line can be, I'm stopping my mind from wandering, and out pours ... Okay, so you got 2 options there, as well as anything else that maybe you want to speak to. I'm just checking the chats. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to start the 3-minute clock so folks could write, and then I'll check the chat, and then we'll come back for a final share and then a closing. Okay, thanks y'all so much. Got about 2 more minutes. As you're approaching your last 90 seconds, remember that you're just writing out your hopes, and you're imagining a different ending, an alternative ending. So that means you literally could say and go in any direction you want, even if it feels absurd. Sometimes that happens in writing, where we're like, that can't actually happen. It can if you say it. It can if you write it. And that's okay. Last 60 seconds, y'all. Okay. Let's go ahead, and even if you're not fully done with your thought, I know these writing prompts are really swift. Remember, you can always return to it after the writing workshop's done. So if you got to put a pause on your page, or a comma, or just like a to be continued, that's totally fine. Kathy, you could go to the next slide. But I do want to open it up in this last, I know we end at 4:30, but if folks could maybe give us maybe another 5 minutes of your time, we're pretty much wrapping up. But I do want to be able to offer the opportunity for folks who maybe want to share either how that was for them, or share what you wrote, and what you changed your mind about, what you reframed for yourself. And again, you can use the chat feature to share, or you can unmute yourself and talk with us. I see Leo naming that the intrusive thought was that they said, you're not enough. if that's a thought that anyone has ever had cross their mind, go ahead and throw it up in the little applause emoji if you want, or a little snaps to Leo. And then they wrote, I changed my mind. I am enough. Everything I do is enough. The fact that I exist is enough. I was born early because I was not getting enough air. My life is my fight to get that air back. Even more, my life is to share my air. I was already starved before I was born. Whew. I changed my mind and choose to use the air I now have to speak up. Ooh, chicken skin again. Again. Jeez. Thank you, Leo, for sharing. I love that image of your little baby body being birthed earthside into this world, fighting its way. Like you were made for this. It was already said and done that you were going to survive this. Thank you so much for showing up and sharing that. Any others who want to share?
Hey, it's Via Lawita. Yeah, I shared the same thing where I wrote, I'm not enough. And
Wow.
and instead of writing that, and it was like, for me, it was because what came up is I couldn't show up to people when they called. And so I just wrote the line that instead of stopping my mind, love, forgiveness, and understanding, joy and hope, and not like the foo-foo stuff, but the real stuff, But I'm with you there, Leo, gotta stop that saying I'm enough. So that's what I wrote.
How powerful that y'all both have the same refrain, the same automatic thought that you share. That also speaks to like you're really not alone in that thought, which also means you're not alone in the power of changing it too. You got a whole community supporting you in that too. We are enough. Yeah, I see that. Alina said, I changed my mind that I need to find joy in myself, with myself and for myself because I am enough. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, y'all. Thank you so much. Unless there's any other last folks who want to share. And again, it's actually more important to me that folks keep this for themselves and do with it what they see fit than it is to push everyone to share. I oftentimes share with folks that like, even in my writing workshops with students, if I'm doing a writing residency with this class for a semester or a few weeks, or even just a one-time workshop like this one, it is never the goal. I never walk in being like, the goal is for everyone to walk away a poet or to walk away wanting to be a writer. The goal is more personal, and I'll never exactly know what the goal means for you, but what I know, if I can at least help in contributing to lessening the suffering that we oftentimes hold by opening up a space for you to discover a part of yourself that maybe doesn't get enough light or attention or love, that's the goal. It was just to be in community to at least do that, right? So thank you I want to just thank everyone for what they have been sharing throughout this whole time. And yeah, if we can just give it up for everyone who's really just taken on this opportunity to try on an experience where we're trying to figure out what this moment looks like for us amidst the pandemic, but also amidst remembering we're not alone. So there's so much to be said about all the check-ins I've ever had throughout this time have constantly reminded me like, man, we're really not alone. And the last thing we need is to have that powerful thought be that we're suffering or that we're in pain alone. We're not. And so I want to thank each and every one of y'all for being together in this space. I want to leave you actually with another Audre Lorde quote. Kathy, yeah, thank you, Kathy. This is one that I carry with me a lot. That reminds me of my duty as an artist. That reminds me of the power of poetry. Before I read it to the group, one thing that Audre Lorde had also said in her body of work is that out of all the art forms there are, the powerful thing about poetry is that it's the most economical art form that there is, that it comes with the least amount of art supplies. You don't need paint, you don't need a canvas, you don't need clay, you don't need it. You can do it anywhere. She talks about like, you could do it on your bus ride to work. You could do it during your break on a napkin. You can do it in between classes because everyone has a story. She talks about how, especially for marginalized people, especially at the time she was talking about women of color, about Black queer women and marginalized people across our communities. Poetry is not a luxury. We're not in places where we can just create art for art's sake. The sacredness in every word we spend on this world and in this lifetime means something. And so we give name to the nameless, and it empowers our thoughts, and then it fuels us to act. And so I leave you with this quote before closing it all the way out. She says, "I speak here of poetry as a revelatory distillation of experience, not the sterile wordplay that too often the white fathers distorted the word poetry to mean in order to cover a desperate wish for imagination without insight. Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives." You can go to the next slide, Kathy. Thank y'all so much just for being here, and give it up for yourselves. Yeah, I leave you with ways to stay connected. Again, I really mean it when I say we're all we got. And so if you want to stay connected beyond this moment, I'm on social media like 47 hours a day through Twitter and Instagram. My handle is just my full name. And then if you go to my website, the contact page is linked to my email in case there's any follow-up. I'm very adamant about the aftercare experiences like this. Oftentimes, if there is more time, I'm really careful about not having folks inviting folks to break open in ways where we can't be stitched back up to go back out into the world. And so I leave my contact information as an intentional way to say, like, let's stay connected. Let's continue to take care of one another and show up and show up for ourselves and heal for our ancestors. And also, someone had mentioned also healing for our future. That's evident for sure that we're also ancestors in training. Yeah. And so how do we connect to that notion? And Kukui also brought up the extension of how we take care of the land is also how we take care of our bodies and ourselves. And how we take care of each other is also an extension of how we take care of our bodies and selves. This notion of in Lakesh, you are my other me, I am your other you. And so thank you all so much. I'm gonna give it to Kathy in case you have any other housekeeping things to mention. Thank you to the TRIO program. Thank you to Highline College for having me.